Sometimes it's hard not to think that modern gaming has gone down a dark path. Live service games can feel more like algorithms than actual games, trying to manipulate you into spending as much time as possible grinding away your life. Eager to sell you microtransactions nearly half the price of the game you already paid for. Single player games aren't much better, adding an artificial grind to slow your progress and encourage you to spend money on XP boosts. But not every modern game has conformed to the status quo. Baldur's Gate 3 is a $60 single-player game with no gimmicks, no microtransactions, and offers 60 to 100 hours of playtime depending on how thoroughly you explore the side content. Not to mention the seemingly endless replayability. It is a game made by gamers, for gamers. This statement from the studio gives you all you need to know about the developer's intentions. Other devs felt so threatened by what Larian Studios accomplished that they had to publicly come out and say how Baldur's Gate 3 is great but shouldn't raise the standards of what we expect from RPGs. While it's ridiculous to think that other studios with more money and resources shouldn't be expected to make games with the same quality as Baldur's Gate 3, the point is that Larian has proved that modern games don't need to waste your time or nickel and dime you in order to be successful. If you focus first and foremost on making a good game, everything else will fall into place. A lesson that AAA studios should take note of. While the monetization of Baldur's Gate 3 alone was enough to garner the support of the gaming community, Larian absolutely knocked the gameplay out of the park. It sits at overwhelmingly positive on Steam. Every review I've seen gushed over how great the game is, all topped off with being awarded Game of the Year for 2023 at the Game Awards. Needless to say, this game was a critical and commercial success. But with all of that context out of the way, I still didn't buy or play this game until over 4 months after its release. Despite all signs pointing to this game being a game I needed to experience, and a game deserving of my support, it took me a while to work up the courage to jump into Baldur's Gate 3. This is simply because I was intimidated. I had never played a turn-based RPG, I've never played D&D, and I had zero knowledge on building these types of characters. When I would scout out some gameplay, my mind would fixate on all these little icons that just seemed so far over my head, and I was right to be intimidated. Baldur's Gate 3 is hard. It does not hold your hand, and it most certainly doesn't give you tips on how to efficiently play the game. This game is all about your freedom to approach any situation however you deem fit. But that freedom can sometimes come at a cost for new players. And as a total noob, I really struggled at times. Part of this was my own fault. I wanted to play on balanced, which I interpreted to be the game's normal difficulty. It offers a story mode, which is the easiest difficulty, and there's nothing wrong if you decide to play through the game that way. But for me, I didn't want to play through the whole game without being forced to, or at least encouraged to learn the game mechanics. I also wanted to go in blindly. I didn't want to look up the best character builds or be flipping page by page through a guide for my entire 86-hour playthrough. This decision alone was by far my biggest source of frustration. I struggled through Act 1. Every major fight was like pulling teeth. I played as Will and must have really screwed up my character build. I didn't even realize how bad a job I did until I added Lizelle and Karlak to my team, and their attacks would have an 80% hit rate, where mine were consistently around 30%. No wonder I was struggling so hard with the combat. The weak link on my team was literally me. Like I said, I continuously failed in Act 1. I failed fighting the goblin leaders, I failed fighting the hag, I failed fighting the Githyanki. I routinely had nights where I'd get on after work, play for 2 to 3 hours, and literally make zero progress. Just a night of losing the same battle I was on the previous day. Going to bed knowing that tomorrow, I'll still be loading up the same save file. When I'd get stuck on these fights, I would look up guides on how to get through it, but it always ended up with someone suggesting I use crowd control, and I'm just like, is that the name of a spell? Or they would suggest using a certain character I didn't have with me, and I was unable to travel to camp to get them from the location I was at. So I would just try again, running into the same brick wall over and over until it finally collapsed. Around 10 to 15 hours in, I was still searching for the magic in Baldur's Gate 3. I was still waiting for a moment that made me think, wow, everyone needs to experience this game. Over 30 hours in, and I thought about quitting. I was stuck on a fight against the Githyanki, and when looking for some help on the fight, I saw a comment that said something along the lines of, "What enemies are you stuck on? I cleared out that whole place and I can't even think of who could be giving you trouble." It was at that point I got off for the night, and was thinking that maybe Baldur's Gate 3 just wasn't for me. I was not having fun. There were bits and pieces that I really enjoyed, mostly interacting with my companions, but those moments were far outweighed by my frustrations with the combat. Fortunately, I gave it one more go, and this is where things started looking up. I got past the Githyanki and immediately traveled to camp to re-spec my characters. I still didn't know what I was doing, but at least I was no longer only hitting 30% of the attacks with my character, and from here on out, every battle was much easier. I headed to the Underdark, and my entire perspective on Baldur's Gate 3 changed. Combat-wise, I was learning how to manage battles, how to use one party member to complement the other three. I still got stuck on the big battles, but it seemed like a switch was flipped in my brain. I was no longer getting as frustrated, I was actually embracing the fights. I enjoyed trying to figure out the encounter, solving it like a puzzle, and it felt so good once I finally figured out a way to squeak by. This was right around the time that you get into Act 2 and the story really starts to come together as well. And from here on out, I really started to feel the magic of Baldur's Gate 3. No story spoilers, but the game starts off with your character in quite a predicament. And early on in Act 1 you run into characters that are in the same situation. All of your companions come from different walks of life, with different goals and aspirations, but you all team up in hopes of solving your common problem. Each character has their own questline and character arc that you can choose to do or ignore completely, and you get to decide how each character plays out. Each character seems to grow alongside you individually as you slowly go throughout the story, hour by hour, working together to achieve a common goal. I can't express the excitement I would get going back to camp and seeing an exclamation above one of my companions, ready to talk about what just happened in the story. I didn't get to experience Will since I played as him, but all of the companions were so well written and voiced. Shadowheart, an orphan deeply committed to fulfilling the will of her goddess Shar. Lysel, a fierce Githyanki warrior that will do anything necessary to survive. Gale, a wizard that needs to consume magical items just to survive. Astarion, a mischievous vampire elf that doesn't seem very trustworthy at first glance. And Karlach, a tiefling that was implanted with an infernal engine by the devil Zariel. A character that I could have completely missed out on altogether having played as Will. I genuinely enjoyed just hanging out at camp and seeing what I could do for them, getting their take on our adventure thus far, and just shooting the shit. To me, my companions did not feel like characters in a video game. They felt like real people, genuine friends that I made over the course of a long journey through a mystical land. One of the most memorable moments for me was the end of Karlach's companion questline. It's an emotional moment as you finish the last objective. Karlach is screaming and burning up and just letting out all of her rage. And once she gets it all out, she mentions our friendship and lets out a subtle, "love you." And I'm just sitting there like, oh my god, you big red fiery tiefling, I love you too, I would do literally anything for you. It's moments like these that made all the anger and frustrations I had along the way worth every second. I didn't even romance Karlach, but the bond of friendship I felt in this moment is something I haven't quite felt in a video game, and I think that's the highest praise I can possibly give it. The RPG mechanics in Baldur's Gate 3 were also immaculate. A common complaint I hear regarding RPGs is the illusion of choice. The game gives you choices to make throughout, but they don't really have an effect on the ending. Tons and tons of choices seem to come down to a simple good or bad. That couldn't feel further from the truth in Baldur's Gate 3. You make countless choices on your journey, and they can completely change your experience. Your companions can die at multiple different points in the game, and that's just the end. No more Karlach or Astarion or Shadowheart or Gale or Lysel. You can do a good playthrough or a Dark Urge playthrough, but there are also multiple shades in between. Right or wrong isn't always black and white, and you can toe that fine line however you deem fit. You can help your friends along their companion quests or completely undermine them. All of these aspects contribute to a world that feels lived in, and completely immerses you into the role that you choose to play. One criticism of Baldur's Gate 3 was that players didn't feel satisfied by the ending. However, in the 4 months I waited to play, Larian actually put out an epilogue. It's hard to comment on this due to the multiple branching paths you can take throughout the game, affecting who lives, who dies, and how the story plays out. But I can genuinely say that the ending I got seemed like a perfect send-off for all the characters. We achieved our goal, and everyone simply goes off on their own way. We started this journey with nothing in common other than the worm in our brains. We spend countless hours learning about each other, growing together, helping each other with our personal quests, and becoming genuine friends. But after the climax, we accomplished our goal and it's time for us to go back to our own lives. The goodbyes are sudden, but necessary, and I felt like the game ended perfectly. That is, until I played the epilogue. It takes place 6 months after the ending, and Withers gathers everyone to camp more or less just to catch up. I had a genuine smile on my face when this happened. I can't explain it, but I felt like I was actually meeting up with a group of friends that I haven't seen in 6 months. Except I literally just finished the game minutes ago. The connection that you build with your companions is something that I haven't felt since Mass Effect 2. And the epilogue does not disappoint. You mostly just run around camp exhausting all of the dialogue options for each companion, but I loved hearing what each character has been up to for the past 6 months, and I was sad once it was over, knowing that this was truly the end of our journey together. It's not about the end, it's about the friends we made along the way. And I feel like I've made some of the best friends and made some memories that I will cherish for the rest of my life. Baldur's Gate 3 is an intimidating game, and rightly so. If you're a new player, you will struggle, you will get frustrated, and you will want to quit. My advice to you is to follow guides, don't give up, and if it comes down to it, lower the difficulty to story mode. This game is something that everyone needs to experience, and if you stick it out to the very end, you will be taken on an epic adventure that you will not soon forget. Thanks for watching.